Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to stick to Japan and we're going to go to another brewery that I've never tried anything from before. So these guys are a very new addition to the Japanese beer scene, but from what I gather they are very experimental and they like to try different things and they're fairly prolific too, so I think it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on these guys as time marches on. But the beer we're going to have a look at today is one that caught my eye mainly because of the name. This is what tends to happen when you discover a new brewery that you don't know. You go for the artwork or you go for the name, but it's also a style that I very much enjoy and one that I've noticed is a little bit more prevalent still in Japan compared to elsewhere, which is a good thing. So I'll need to keep that in mind as we go forward as well. But needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this beer is going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good one. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review, and as always I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. Always cool to introduce new Japanese breweries here on Rampant Lion Reviews. But yeah, for this review then, we are going to head up to Hokkaido, the North Island of Japan, the biggest prefecture in the country as well. We're going to go to the kind of southeastern part of the island, to a little place called Tsurui in the Akan area, and we're having a look at my first beer from Brasserie Knot. So this particular beer is called Moon. It comes in at 8% ABV and they're describing this one as a double IPA. From what I can gather, this one leans a little bit more toward the West Coast side of things, but it is quite highly rated and yeah, it caught my attention mainly because of the name. I studied astrophysics, so yeah, out of the beers that they had available, this is the one that I went for mainly because of that. So yeah. This is yet another beer that was bought at liquor shop Asahiya in Taishibashi Emaichi here in Osaka, run by Koji and his daughter Rika, based in Koji's grandfather's old soy sauce factory. Great selection of Japanese beers. They are always different breweries to have a look at, and they've got a good few interesting American things, Australian, Canadian stuff too, and then some more old school European beers, Belgian, Germans and things like that. So definitely worth taking a trip up there if you find yourself here in Osaka. But yeah, let's crack on with this one then and see what this beer is all about. So, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting though, just fast forward. All the usual links can be found in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my future reviews that hopefully I can do from Brasserie Knot. This is the very first time I'm trying one of their beers as I mentioned, but there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and remember you can go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the geography tagging system. So go into the homepage, use the search bar, put your hometown, state, county, whatever you like in there. If I've reviewed beers from the area that you search for, they will pop up. Failing that though, you can check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Japanese playlist along with a number of other things, and there are many playlists from different countries that you can check out too. But yeah, let's go on to my brewery notes then, and I'll tell you a little bit about Brasserie Knot. So, Brasserie Knot, as I've mentioned to you already, are based in the little village of Tsurui in the Akan area of Hokkaido, which is toward the east of the island, and I guess you could also say it's the southeastern part as well. But the town is just adjacent to the Kushiro wetlands, and this area is known for its nature and also for its dairy industry as well. If you go around Japan, you'll find a lot of the butter and a lot of the milk that you can buy is from the dairy industry in Hokkaido. But the company itself was founded back in 2022 by Taikai Uitake, who is originally from Saitama near Tokyo and previously studied a combination of microbiology, biochemistry and food science in Tokyo itself. But he went on to work for Koeido Beer in 2008, and then he moved to work for Ushitora in Tochigi in 2014, and following this in 2018 he moved to Hokkaido to work for Futsubukotan in Furano for a short spell before moving to Godspeed Brewery in Toronto, but this was cut short unfortunately due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and at this point he decided to run to Hokkaido with his family, and this is where he began to work for Kubukotan Brewery for a short period of time. But to establish his own brewery, which is what he wanted to do for quite a while, he used the crowdfunding campaign called Campfire. This is quite a common thing actually amongst Japanese craft brewers. So he used the Campfire platform and raised a total of just under 16.7 million Japanese yen. So they refurbished the gymnasium of the former Mosetsuri elementary school, which had closed unfortunately after 81 years. You know, that's a product of what's going on in Japan. The rural population is kind of dying out. Unfortunately, people are moving to the cities. So this school closed after 81 years. They went in and renovated it all up, which is quite nice. But they received the last of their equipment in November of 2022, and they released their first cans not long after this. But the idea behind the name at Brasserie Knot is that Taikai wants to make a knot between different cultures and lifestyles, and so in essence he wants to make a knot between Tsurui and craft beer. But they also chose brasserie rather than brewery, because brasserie was originally a beer brewery with a restaurant attached to it and a beer hall, and essentially he wants his brewery to be a place to visit, and so to make a knot between the brewery and beer drinkers. So yeah, this was his idea behind the name. He wants to make connections with people, I guess you could say. But Taikai also runs a consultancy service that he started back in 2017, and this company is now associated with the Brasserie Knot brand. So he assists different companies that are considering brewing their own beer. And if you go through the Campfire profile for when he was funding this, he talks about many of the different projects that he's taken part in. He's done quite a few things to help other breweries get off the ground, so I'm sure he'll be successful in his own venture going forward. But as of April 2023, when we're filming this review for you, these guys have produced 10 different kinds of beer according to Untappd, and when you consider that these guys have only been in existence, or operational existence, I guess you could say, since probably the very end of 2022, start of 2023, and we're filming this review in April 2023, I think that's a decent number to be at, actually. A couple of different beers a month, you know, one a week, something like that. But yeah, be interesting to see how these guys go on. Like I said, there's a few different styles available from them so far, and I'm sure with all these connections in the brewing industry, he'll start doing collaborations and stuff like that fairly soon. But yeah, I think that's everything we can really say about Brasserie Knot for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, you can of course check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on, and you can check out the Rate Beer and Untappd pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. So yeah, let's go on and have a little look at the beer itself. So I'll let you have a wee look at the artwork on this one before we open it up. As you can see, pretty nicely presented, quite an abstract style of artwork there. You can see the symbol for Brasserie Knot, the stag, which I think is pretty nice. Plain silver top on the can here, and there's obviously a pattern underneath the label as well, so I might need to take that off a little bit later and have a look at it. But yeah, 350 millilitres this one, 8% double IPA. Like I say, I think it's a West Coast IPA. It says on the can that it has 70 IBUs, so that's probably an indicator that it is a West Coast double IPA. So yeah, should be quite interesting. If memory serves me correctly, I think I paid about 800 yen for this beer, if I'm not mistaken. Could be a little bit more than that, but if it is 800 yen, that is going to translate to, it's probably about 900 actually, that's going to translate to somewhere in the region of €7, 70 Swedish kroner, about £6 sterling, maybe somewhere in the region of like $7.50, $8 American, something like that. Craft beer, as I always say, is a little bit more expensive in Japan because the malt has to be imported, as do the hops from different countries across the world. They don't really produce their own barley or hops that much here, unfortunately, but maybe that's something that will start to evolve going forward. So yeah, the Moon, 8% double IPA. Let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting. So yeah, would be cool to go up and actually visit these guys at some stage. One of my favourite trips I've ever taken was going up and exploring Hokkaido a little bit. We need to explore a little bit more of the northern part of the island, but we did Furano, Bie, Sapporo itself. So yeah, going down to see Hakodate at some stage would be quite cool. But yeah, going out to see the east and the north would be my next goal if we go up to Hokkaido again. Beautiful place, I have to say, really lovely. So if you come to Japan, I do recommend that you explore the countryside a wee bit. Don't just stick to the big cities and the concrete jungles. There's some really lovely nature out there. But yeah, anyway, we'll see about doing that in the future. So let's have a wee look and see this beer. As you can see, this one is poured pretty much as you would expect from a more West Coast leaning IPA. So you can see the head on this one, before it disappears, is about one finger. I would describe that as being perfect white. Kind of a bumpy head actually. You can see there's some medium-sized bubbles there toward the top of the liquid, and a few more foamy ones above that before you reach the top of the head there. But yeah, in terms of colour, I think it's fair to say that this one is a very bright, rich golden straw. I'm not sure how well you're going to see that on the camera, because this obviously isn't my regular camera, it's not quite as powerful, but yeah, there are one or two little bits of sediment in the bottom of the glass there. But yeah, definitely fair to say this is a lovely, quite rich golden colour, this one. You can see little bits of sediment particle just kind of floating around in this one, and a few bigger ones have just fallen toward the bottom of the glass there. But one or two big bubbles of carbonation sticking to the side of the glass, and a regular stream of kind of medium-sized bubbles just going up toward the head there. But yeah, it certainly looks very nice. Remember, the colour of your beer depends on a few things. One, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. But any barrel aging you do or adjuncts you put into the beer will play a role as well. But when it comes to IPAs, for the most part, you don't have to care about that. It's only usually with the kind of fruited IPAs that you need to think about this sort of thing. But yeah, a nice looking beer, I have to say. And certainly its appearance is a bit more reminiscent of a West Coast. But yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the appearance of this one. Let's have a closer look at the aroma and just see what it's all about. Yeah, so I think for me, just on the aroma, this is going to be one of these beers that's a so-called kind of American IPA, you know, somewhere between the New England and West Coast side of things, or it's going to be a straight up West Coaster. We'll need to see when we actually taste it. But yeah, aroma wise, it's leaning more toward the West Coasty side of things. So for me, when it comes to the West Coast IPAs, I think there's two different ways they can go. They can be a little bit more bready and kind of biscuity, such as the Pliny the Elder from Russian River, or they can be a little bit more along the lines of the kind of more oily caramel type ones, such as the Sierra Nevada Torpedo. Both are very good in my experience though, but I'm guessing from the colour of this one that it's going to be more like a kind of bready, biscuity affair, so more like kind of Pliny the Elder. So yeah, first impressions of the aroma, it's quite an oily New England IPA. Get quite a little bit of biscuit out of it, a little bit of bread, also some kind of nice oily, more citrusy leaning fruits, and a good little bit of a grassy green component as well actually. So interesting aroma with this one. Let's just break it down and describe it a wee bit more in depth before we actually go on and taste the beer. So yeah, for me, the backbone of the beer, aroma wise, is more, it's definitely more of a, it's got a little bit of that kind of fresh white bready bread crust to it. There's a wee touch of woodiness in there and a little bit of Jacob's cream cracker, but yeah, it's got a good little bit of white bread to it as well. I am picking up, I want to say there's a little bit of wheat in this one. I'm getting a little bit of wheaty bitiness kind of at the back of the nose, but there's also a little bit of a more kind of dense white bready wheat to it as well. Yeah, aroma wise, the bready character is kind of interesting. Like I say, you've got that fresh white bready bread crust forming the backbone of the beer, bit of cracker, little touch of wood, but yeah, some fluffy white bread and the more dense wheat. But the more that you smell of this beer, you start to get a little bit more kind of graininess out of it. It potentially has a little bit of a kind of wholemeal, brown bready character as well, which I find quite interesting. But yeah, like I say, this one for me is either going to be an American IPA or it's going to be a more biscuity leaning West Coast, because above the brown bread, above the white bread I should say, sorry, you get a little bit of the more kind of biscuity note. You can definitely smell with this one that it's higher up the alcohol scale. You can smell that it's got a wee bit of booziness to it, because it has, there's quite a bit of McVitie's digestive biscuit in this one, and for me you can smell from the kind of concentration of that like oily biscuity character that has a little bit more booze. I definitely wouldn't say that this one was you know, caramel. I would say that it's more biscuity. You get the lighter, more kind of grainy side of the biscuit, but you get the more concentrated type quality out of this one as well. But aroma wise, the malty side of things is pretty damn nice. Just thinking, is there anything else we really need to say about this one? Yeah, I think that covers the malty side of it, to be honest with you. Yeah, not much in the way of yeasty character out of this one. I would say just a little touch of the woody, kind of farmhousey bread. But yeah, if we move on to the green component now with this one, for me, there is a good little bit of there's a little bit of earthiness there, but for me the green component in this beer really leans a bit more toward a kind of bright floral aromatic side of things, but it has a wee touch of piney resin to it as well. Now when it comes to IPAs, there are 3 different kinds of hoppings you can use. Assuming that you have a 90-minute wort boil, just use that as an example, you can have early addition hopping, which takes place within the first hour of the wort boil. It gives you mainly bitterness, more simple chemistry, you know, you have more heat for a longer period of time, you can extract more chemicals from the hops. In the aroma that translates to a more deep, dank side of things. But then in the latter half hour of the wort boil, that is late addition hopping, that gives you a little bit of bitterness but mainly flavour and aroma, and that translates to a brighter kind of more grassy green component in the beers. Dry hopping, which comes after the wort boil is complete, that gives you pretty much all flavour and aroma, and it kind of gives you the same as late addition hopping. But generally speaking, for me, early addition hopping tends to dominate in the aroma, so you get a more deep dank character rather than having the bright floral notes. But at 70 IBUs, they would have had to use a little bit of early addition hopping to get that, I would think, without it being very difficult and being, kind of uneconomic to make the beer. So yeah, for me this is quite interesting because the green component, it has a wee bit of dankness to it, but it's actually more kind of bright and zesty in a sense. So you get a lot of kind of wet but slightly oily, zesty, grassy notes out of the beer. Also some floral aromaticity coming out behind it as well. But yeah, not too much in the way of deep, dank character, which I have to say I quite enjoy. But yeah, other than that, I don't think there's anything to really say about the green component of the beer. Yeah, other than that, I think the fruity side of things is quite interesting. I'm very curious about the hoppy components in this beer, because I think this one might have a little bit of Nelson Sauvin in it. I'm certainly getting a good little bit of that kind of white, green, grapey, gooseberry type note that I would expect in Nelson Sauvin. It could of course be German Hallertau Blanc, it gives you a similar note. Or it could, there's another hop I've come across recently that has a kind of similar character to this one. Enigma from Australia would be another option. But this beer for me, there's a lot of kind of gooseberry and white, green, grapey sort of notes out of it. Yeah, could be something like that. Behind that though, there are little elements of like apricot and maybe a little bit of oily pineapple, something like that, and maybe a little bit of a juicier mango. But I really think that the aroma of this beer, on the fruity side of things, leans toward like gooseberry, white, green, grapey characters. Yeah, there's not really like a pungent passion fruit or grapefruit or anything. It's a wee bit of a more apricot-y, pineapple-y, maybe very slightly mango-y type note you get out of this one. But yeah, more apricot and pineapple with a lot of kind of gooseberry, white, green grapes. I don't know, could it be more limey? There's maybe a little bit of lime in there. But no, for me, it's not. It's more juicy and wet rather than anything else. I'd be very curious to know what the hop bill is in this one. It wasn't listed anywhere that I looked, but yeah, it's certainly more kind of gooseberry and white, green, grapey for me. So I'm curious to see about that. It could be a bit of Motueka in this one as well. Nelson Sauvin and Motueka would be likely candidates for me. Equinot from the US also gives you that similar limey sort of thing to Motueka as well. But yeah, interesting aroma, I have to say that about this beer, so it gets a thumbs up from me. As I always say, take a wee bit of time to enjoy that aroma before you get stuck in, but I think we'll need to take a look at this beer now. So this one is the Moon, a double IPA at 8% ABV from Brasserie Knot in Hokkaido in the north of Japan. Really interesting little really interesting place, I have to say, from Tsurui village. I forgot the name of the village, so I had to check that. The Tsurui village in the Akan area in the sort of kind of southeasternish part of the island. Let's get stuck into this one. Slàinte, skål, cheers, kampai. Yeah, that's pretty nice, I have to say. Yeah, it is a little bit more to me. This really feels more like one of these beers that you could term an American IPA. It doesn't kind of nail its colours to the West Coast mast, and it doesn't nail its colours to the New England mast, if you like. So it's kind of somewhere in between. Now, it leans more and more toward the West Coast, but it still has a wee bit of the New England smoothness for me, which I find really interesting. But yeah, as I say, it's a nice beer. You can talk about style categories all day and debate them and things, but for me, I think the main question should always be, is it a nice beer? And this is a very nice beer, so a good, solid introduction to Brasserie Knot for me. So we need to try a few different styles from them going forward, but in the meantime, let's just break down this beer and describe it a wee bit more. The first impression I have of this one is that it's quite an oily and grassy and floral and sort of Nelson Sauvin gooseberry green grapey leaning double IPA, but very nice and smooth and drinkable, I have to say as well. It covers up its booze fairly well, but let's go in and just describe that flavour a wee bit more in depth. Yeah, so in terms of the kind of middle third of your palate, then we'll start there as we often do. You can feel the backbone of the beer is that very fresh white bready bread crust that I was talking about, and I think, yeah, for me that does go together really quite nicely. So a little bit of kind of fresh white bready bread crust in there. Then toward the front of that middle third of your palate, you do get just a little touch of a smooth woody note coming out of this one. Above that, there's maybe a tiny thin layer of a little bit of a brown bready character, but for me, the mainstay of that middle third of your palate is like a more dense white bready note. It does have a little bit of airiness and fluffiness to it, but yeah, for me, the bready character in this beer is a little bit more dense and white bready leaning, actually. So yeah, I like that about this one. I think just from the flavour, I was picking up a little bit of wheatiness in the aroma of this beer. And like I say, this one leans more toward the West Coast side of things. One of the key differences between the New England and the West Coast IPAs is that West Coast IPAs, for the most part, predominantly use barley malt, whereas New England IPAs also use a little bit of wheat malt and a little bit of oat malt. It isn't unheard of to use a little bit of wheat or a bit of oat in West Coast IPAs. You know, the what was it called? The one, I forget the name of the brewer now. The Sculpin from the name of the brewery's gone right on my head. They use a little bit of wheat in their West Coast IPA. I've seen other ones with a little bit of oat in there. There's something about the smoothness of the malt base that makes me want to say there's potentially a little bit of oat or a little bit of wheat in this one, and in the aroma I was picking up wheat. The smoothness in this one might indicate a little bit of oat, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if I was told there was something like that in there, because above that more dense white bready layer, you do get a little bit of smoothness to this one, which could indicate the presence of wheat. I've always found that wheat just gives you a little bit of a more dense white bready character, but then above that sort of wheaty layer, you have a little bit of a more sweeter character coming out of the beer. So let's focus on that sweet side of the middle third of the palate here. So yeah, for me, the sweet side of things, if you go to the dead centre of your palate, you can feel there's a little circle there, and that is pretty much like a straight up caramel. I would go as far as saying that it has a little bit of caramel note to it, but as you move further out from the centre of your palate, there's a wee bit more of a kind of McVitie's digestive, biscuity sort of thing to it. So yeah, I certainly do like how that goes together. This beer, it gives you a little bit more sweetness the further into the aftertaste that you go. But yeah, it's got a nice balance, this one. The malt base is actually quite light in this beer, and it's not too kind of big and fluffy. This is a more kind of oily and slick affair when it comes to IPAs for me. But like I say, I do like how this one goes about its business, should we say. Yeah, so I think that covers everything we need to say about the middle third of your palate. Like a little bit of concentrated caramel in the middle of your palate, and it moves to be a little bit more of a lighter kind of biscuity affair the further out you go. But yeah, let's go on to the back third of your palate then. So the border region between middle and back third of your palate, you do get a little bit of a kind of bready build up on this one. You can feel it's a sort of white bready character, a little bit of brown bread in there, but then the base of that back third of your palate is quite similar in its layers. But as I've always said, you get more kind of dry and bitter flavours further back on the palate. So yeah, for me, the bread crust is there, and it is just a little bit kind of more dry and grainy, if you like. You've got a wee touch of just almost like brown bready character in there, but you can feel the layer is a little bit taller and more airy. Then you've got that more dense white bready character sitting above it too, and then you can just feel on top of that what I suspect is a little bit of wheat, and it's got a wee touch of bitiness to it. But like I say, in this beer, any wheat that's in here is really just smoothing the whole thing out. But above everything else on that back third of the palate, there's a few yeasty type flavours coming out. So let's just have a wee look at those. So yeah, for me, the yeasty side of things with this beer, it's got a little bit of it's more like a kind of farmhousey, white bready sort of thing. A wee bit of a more, yeah, like a kind of farmhousey, white bready sort of thing. It's got a wee bit of a more, how do we say, there's a little touch of honeycomb in there. I quite often get honeycomb in the yeasty side of these beers, but yeah, there's a little bit more of a woody, grainy, light white, farmhousey sort of bready thing, then a wee bit of a kind of honeycomb character to it as well. And that sits above that, what I suspect is a little bit of wheaty bitiness. But you can certainly feel on the back third of your palate, the flavour is taller. Then as you come further forward into the middle third of the palate, it just kind of condenses down and squashes together. But yeah, I think the way everything goes together in this beer is quite nice actually, on that malty side of things. But let's move on to the hoppy side of the beer and see what that gives us. So, green component, as we said, is quite wet and quite oily. It says on the can that this beer is 70 IBUs, but it doesn't feel madly bitter to me. There is a wee bit of bitterness that builds the further into the aftertaste that you go, but to me it doesn't feel madly heavy on the IBUs. So yeah, back corners of the palate, there's a little touch of earthiness there, and as you move further forward it gives you a wee bit of herbal character, but then progressively as you move forward you get more and more floral aromaticity out of this one. Overall, I would say that the green component is kind of oily and slightly wet, and as I say, I don't find this beer overly kind of spicy or bitter or anything like that, but yeah, a little bit of floral kind of spicy character there. Then round the front curve of the tongue it's a wee bit lighter and more grassy, and it just gives you that little touch of zestiness as well. So yeah, the way that the beer goes together in that sense I think is really nice. Lovely kind of wet, oily, grassy character, and you can feel that the zestiness builds a little bit into the aftertaste, and a wee bit of the floral character comes out. But yeah, I think that covers the green component in this one, to be honest with you. Yeah, let's focus on that front third of your palate and the fruity side of things. So the border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you do get a little touch of in a white bready build up there. Then the base of the front third of the palate is a wee touch more kind of, you've got a wee bit of the bread crust but a smooth white bready character there. Then you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out. And for me, what I was picking up in the aroma has kind of transpired in the flavour. So further back on the palate, you have a wee bit more kind of zesty, citrusy kind of character. So overall, I would say that whole front third of your palate, it's got a little bit of an oily gooseberry note to it. And then as you move further forward, it's got a little bit more of a kind of oily, zesty, limey character as well. So yeah, I like that about this one. Yeah, so you've got that kind of oily, zesty, limey character there. I think Nelson Sauvin with this one, or potentially a little bit of Enigma could be in this one. It does have a wee touch of an almost red fruity note to it. In fairness, Enigma might be a shout, because Enigma gives you a little bit of this almost red curranty note, and I'm getting a wee bit of that in this one. Enigma's a really interesting hop, but I think Nelson Sauvin, Motueka, or maybe Hallertau Blanc, something like that. Like I say, most of the front third of your palate is dominated by this kind of gooseberry, white, green, grapey flavour, but as you move toward the kind of front tip of your tongue, it has a wee bit of a more... it's definitely got a little bit more of a kind of limey, zesty character to it, and there's a wee, just like tiny touch of strawberry or something for me, which could be strawberry red currant kind of thing, so that would probably be Enigma, I think. Be very curious to know what the hop bill in this beer is, but it's very oily from that perspective. So yeah, I think that's everything we need to say about the flavour. Let's just round off with a look at the mouthfeel then with this beer. For me, this one is kind of mid-bodied, pushing toward the top end of mid-bodied, but I find this one quite easy to drink. It's more an oily and slick beer, this, rather than anything else. And it feels quite clean at the same time, which isn't surprising when if you know how kind of rural and kind of peaceful and mountainous and things that Hokkaido is. So that clean mouthfeel, I think, kind of suits the vibe of the small village brewery in Hokkaido, definitely. We know from the can that this beer is 70 IBUs, but I don't think I would have guessed that from actually drinking the thing. The green component for me is a little bit more wet, and it kind of builds in bitterness the further into the aftertaste you go, but I don't find it madly bitter, to be honest. But yeah, the malt base, like we said, a little bit of smoothness to it, wee touch of dryness, but quite an oily, sweet character, and the fruity side of this beer gives you a wee bit of dryness as well, but it gets oily and more sweet the further into the aftertaste that you go to. But yeah, lovely, lovely beer, this one, and I certainly like how everything pieces together for me. So yeah, I think we can leave it at that for this one. This was the Moon, an 8% double IPA, definitely leaning more toward the West Coast side of things, but quite an American IPA in a sense, because it has that bit more of a smooth character to it, and it just doesn't feel quite as dank and bitter as some of the other ones that I've come across in this style category before. But certainly a very nice beer, and I look forward to seeing what Brasserie Knot are going to do in the future. But yeah, as I say, that's everything for this review. So once again, thank you for watching my reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comments section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Brasserie Knot. And like I say, we will be returning to these guys at some point in the future. I do hope we can get up there and do an out and about video for the channel at some stage. So until then, Slàinte Scott, cheers. Check out my social media, check out Brasserie Knot's social media, and I'll see you guys in the next review. Slàinte Scott, cheers, and Kampai.